Hi, my name is Dan Henry, and I'm Senior Manager of Government Affairs here at the Telecommunications Industry Association. Thanks for joining our discussion today on the path to Next Generation 911. With us today are Craig Dollar, Director of NG 911 Strategy for Motorola Solutions, and Patrick Halley, Executive Director of the NG 911 Institute and partner at Wilkinson Barker Knauer Law Firm. We're going to chat today about the hurdles we'll need to overcome in order to implement Next Generation 911. Guys, thanks for being with us today. So let's cue it up with the first question. Basically, define the space that we're in. Let's talk about what the current emergency call center, or PSAP, looks like. Patrick, do you want to take that first?
Sure. So next February will be the 50th anniversary of the first 911 call, which occurred in Haleyville, Alabama, Craig's home state. And over that 50-year period, as you know, there's been a substantial amount of change in technology and the form of communications that consumers use. That first 911 call was a phone call, and with a voice of one person calling one other person on the other end of the line. No data, just a voice, right? Over time, we sort of evolved to the point where the 911 center has some small amount of information with that call, location primarily, right? An address if it was a fixed call. Over time, we evolved to include estimated location for wireless service. And that's largely where we are today, right? It's still one person on the other end of a call, either the person who's asking for help or who's witnessing an emergency, calling one other person on the other end of the line who's answering that call and dispatching assistance. And that's largely what the 911 system has been, and it's been massively effective, right? Millions and millions of 911 calls, countless lives saved. But that system and that infrastructure today looks, in my opinion, in many ways, a lot like the first 911 call, not like the smartphones that we all carry around in our pockets. So what we have today is a very effective system that is very effective at answering voice calls, and we're starting to see some text messaging capability into 911, about 20-30%. But that 911 system today still typically involves a person calling another person and explaining what they're seeing. I think what we're going to move towards is the ability of the 911 center to really keep up with the technology that consumers are using every day. So when we communicate with our family, we're doing FaceTime, right? We're doing real-time video. We're sending text messages with pictures. We're streaming live events in real time to as many people that are out there willing to look at what we're doing. We're not doing that with 911, right? We're not sending pictures to 911. We're not doing real-time streaming of an accident scene or the birth the delivery of a baby. We're not able to show that information to those who can help respond to those emergencies. I think where we're headed is a system that's capable over time of being able to keep pace with modern technology, and that voice will still be key, but we'll be able to supplement it with censored data, with video, with images, with pictures. And I think we'll move from sort of a voice-centric 911 system to one that's multimedia, that's also able to communicate with responders in the field using those same types of capabilities. And the 911 center becomes more than just an entity that's receiving phone calls. It becomes more of a sort of emergency operations hub, in sort of the way I see it developing. But I'm interested in Craig's perspective.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Patrick's assessment. A couple of other things that we would expect are the speed in which we receive these calls. Today it takes about roughly 7 to 8 seconds to process a 911 call from the time you release the second one till it actually rings at a PSAP.
Which can be a lifetime.
Which can be a lifetime. We have the when seconds count, when seconds matter. There's a lot of taglines, and so it's very important that we increase that as we transition and migrate to an IP-based system, which is consistent with what the carriers are also doing. We would expect that time to also be decreased substantially, upwards of maybe 7 of those 8 seconds, give or take. So the speed in which we get the call enhanced greatly. And then more precise location is another thing that we'd like. Patrick mentioned, in a landline, it's great, but since 80+% of our calls are wireless, we get rough or coarse locations, and sometimes not too bad, but we expect more out of the system, and so that's one of the things that we would really anticipate.
We are making progress, right? There are states that are moving forward with NG 911. There are regions, there are counties. It's not a situation where nobody's moving forward with next generation 911. We are starting to see some progress, but it's not uniform, right? And I think one of the concerns we have to be careful about is that we have haves and have-nots in this country, within a state and among the states. So in terms of the major issues, look, first of all, 911 works. right? Everything I said earlier about the desire to have a more robust capability is important, but when you dial 911, you 99.999% of the time, right, you're getting your call answered.
It's an extremely ridiculously reliable service.
Right.
And people don't sometimes want to tinker with that.
So one, it doesn't necessarily seem like this pressing emergency that needs to be solved. But Craig made a couple good points. One, carriers are transitioning all of their legacy sort of TDM networks, the camera trunks of the past that powered telephone networks. That's all being moved to the side over time as carriers upgrade their networks. And as carriers upgrade their networks, the 911 center is going to be on an island if it's the only thing out there that's still tied to an old network. And so even though it works now, even the voice capability is not necessarily going to work down the road if we don't upgrade it. So one, I think we suffer from our own success because 911 calls today do get answered. And two, I think, look, this has got to be a priority, right? And it's not necessarily the same level of priority in every community and within every state. So one, I think we really have a leadership issue where we need to have people understand that this is a very important issue. There are major benefits to NG911, and we need to make that case. And of course, funding is always a challenge because we have to, one, maintain the system we have and upgrade to next generation 911 at the same time.
Yep. The transition is not trivial. As Patrick said, the carriers are decommissioning the selective routers, which serves the camera trunks that determines which calls go where, and that's the methodology that's being used. And it's a 1950s, 60s technology, and they want those things out of the network, right? And as we transition to an IP world, those must happen because you don't want those to be islands of technology that are just there to service 911 because that becomes rather unsustainable. And the other thing that I would mention about that is that selective routers don't often talk to one another. So if you get a call from one selective router, it's almost impossible, if non-existent, to transfer it to a PSAP that's on another selective router. So in NG911, it allows you to collectively associate to more agencies. A much deeper dive in topic, but it's just another subset of the example.
Sort of related to that, right? You need to have the network be upgraded, right? So all the 911 centers in a region or in a state are connected to the existing, typically it's the existing telco infrastructure. And whoever it is that's going to provide that new IP network connectivity, you have to look at your network and upgrade it. You have to upgrade the equipment inside the 911 centers. And that's going on in many areas.
It is.
And then you have to have the carriers and those who have data, whether it's a voice call, a text message, a sensor, right, be able to communicate that information and get it over the network into the right PSAP. So my point is, it's complex, right? So one, you got to have leadership to address that complexity. Two, you need to have the funding that's necessary to do it, and you have to really take it on as a project. And it's not an easy thing to do, but people are doing it. We just need to make sure it happens everywhere.
So you mentioned funding, which is probably the elephant in the room. It sounds like a lot of these projects involve, they cross borders, states, regions. From a federal level, how does funding for 911 work on a federal level?
So 911 has been and still is fundamentally paid for at the state and local level. It's a very much local service.
Referendum in each county, generally speaking, to approve it, to be added to the bill, and it's collected.
Right.
In different states, it's done differently, but it's still a localized issue.
Like a school levy, almost.
It is.
So if you look at your phone bill, you probably don't get a phone bill anymore. But if you did, it would have various fees, and there's usually a 911 fee. Sometimes it's local, sometimes it's state, sometimes it's both. There's no federal 911 fee, right? So it's state and local funding, and as Craig pointed out, there's different structures in terms of how it's collected and how it's dispersed. Right. The federal government has, though, provided grant money in the past. Not very much, I will say. $43.5 million was awarded in grants several years back. Right now, there's a National 911 office who is seeking comment on its proposal to award $115 million, which will, we think, probably be available at some point towards the end of next year. So there's some grant funding in the pipeline for 911. But as you can imagine, $115 million is fairly insubstantial compared to the costs we're going to need to upgrade nationwide. There is some other legislation that's being considered that would look at additional federal funding. And I think, most people aren't asking the federal government to come in and solve NG911. It's a state issue, it's still a local issue.
It's a local issue.
But I think folks look at the federal government as, goes back to a point I made earlier, you can't just stop what we're doing right now, take about a year while we go to our next generation 911 system, right? You got to have those calls answered. So you got to maintain the legacy and you got to transition. So I think most people envision a federal role really to help with that transition to get us over the hump to NG 911.